Hello, it's Shaylee and welcome to week number 4 of our Quilt Along for a Cause 2020. We are working on our fox this week. And this week you'll notice that this fox actually has a name. His name is Freddy. So let's get started. This week the piecing itself is reasonably straightforward. However, assembling the sections is going to be a little bit more tedious. There are more sections and quite a few of them come to reasonably sharp points. And those sharp points does make assembly a longer process. Not because it's necessarily difficult, but just because it takes extra time to make sure that you are precise. It can also be more difficult because if you are like me and you get a little carried away and then you glance back at your directions and realize you've skipped a step, you can't go back and add it in as easily. If you, for instance, forgot to add the D section to ABC before you assembled it to E, now you're gonna have to either take it apart or figure out how to do a Y seam. I'm not a big fan of Y seams. When I mess up, I usually deconstruct what I've sewn together. First up, we've got section A to section B. Section B is this little triangle, and section A is going to be his right ear. So we've got section A and section B. Ignore my dog, she's being very whiny today. We've got our first hard angle, and this particular pattern, I did my best to make it still reasonably simple, which is why a lot of the patterns look maybe a little bit cartoonish, or it looks like maybe it could have been refined a little bit more. I wanted this to be not only kid-friendly, but also beginner-friendly. That's why some of the patterns look the way that they do. The sharp angles can be a little bit more difficult because, not because of the point itself, but because if you don't get it lined up exactly right, you end up messing up this straight line here. So when you go to sew down the side of what is going to become AB, if you've messed it up, that could no longer be a straight line. And so you'll have to either rip it out or ease it out a little bit so that it still sews in a straight line. That's one of the reasons that I tend to sew on the side that has the fewest sections assembled. To get started, we're going to take A to B and assemble that very quickly. All right, we've got section A and B, and we're going to take section C and sew it along the bottom. Section C does have one very important point. You'll want to make sure that the orange of his face is lined up, or whatever color, the side of his face is lined up very exactly. Otherwise, it's not going to have quite the same effect. Now we have section A, B, C, and we're ready to assemble it to D. So we'll dig through here, and here's D. And you'll notice right here that section D2 and section C7 do not line up. So the only place you really have to make sure matches exactly is the corners, and then I usually stick one in the middle just to make sure that it didn't droop on me. So there we have our first large section, which is A, B, C, and D. And we are going to be attaching all of those to E. Now, when we attach to E, we have a white point down here at the bottom that needs pinned exactly. And then more noticeably is going to be up at the top of the head. Because of the contrast between your background and the top of your head, this is going to be one of the most noticeable spots if it's not pinned accurately. So I would start there, and then I would check here with a pin, and then everywhere else just needs nice and evened out. Sections A, B, C, and D all ready to go, and then they're going to get sewn to section E. Because section E is going to be one straight continuous line that has not been pieced at all, I'm going to match everything up to that side and sew with section E on top. if that makes sense. Now, here's what I was talking about earlier. I did a pretty good job lining these up. However, on section D down here, you can see that it's not actually a straight line with everything else. See, it sticks out a little bit. Everything else is reasonably straight. I could have sewn on this side and been okay. However, by sewing from this side, my line is nice and perfectly straight. And because I've used pins to make sure that the important parts line up exactly, I'm able to sew on that one side, get the perfectly straight line. It doesn't matter that some of these other spots maybe didn't hit what should have been the line, and I still end up with my points exactly where they're supposed to be. So that top of the head is exactly where it's supposed to be, and right here on his collar is going to be exactly where it's supposed to be. Now I will mention some paper piecers would have torn the paper off as they go. That helps reduce some of the bulk in some of these seams here. It also makes it easier to tear the paper out. Now that I've sewn through it, it's a lot harder to get to that paper. I decided not to do that for this video, even though that's what I usually do, because it makes it so that when you go to take photos of the paper, you're able to see light through it and it looks funny. I also chose not to do it that way. When I go to sew all of the sections or all of the blocks together, they look more cohesive when I'm filming. So that's the only reason I didn't do that. Most of the time, especially with this busy of an area, I would have pulled the paper out. Now that we have sections A, B, C, D, and E all together, we are to add section F right here. This is a nice, sharp, easy to identify point. You're easily able to tell where the point on F1 is. On this line that goes from D into the E's, you have to study a little bit more. You might naturally think that it should be this point over here, but what you're lining up is the point of F1 to that very obtuse angle on E3. And if you remember your geometry, an obtuse angle is something that's larger than 90 degrees. When they get very obtuse, sometimes it's easy to miss it when you go to start pinning and you think that that couldn't possibly be your corner. But right there, underneath what's the fish identification on E3 is actually the point that goes to F1. And make sure when you get down here to the point of F1, you sew all the way off. That helps make sure that that corner is not difficult to work with. It's time to set this half of the pattern aside. And the next step is to iron G to H, which is the other ear to the other eye. So G to H like this. And there is a point right here where the ear connects to the face that's important to match. The reason that this section right here doesn't match up exactly to everything else, and it looks a little chunked out, is, as I was saying earlier, I was trying to keep the patterns as simple as possible, and there was no way to make this piece connect without adding one more little itty bitty triangle. And I decided that simplicity was more important for these patterns. If you're looking for a more complex fox, I do have one in my Etsy shop. And you can see right here, every once in a while, things are not 100% accurate, even for me, and I'm the one that created the pattern. And you just kind of have to come to terms with yourself. Would you rather rip it out and try again, or would you rather leave it? I tend to take the Bob Ross look at quilting. I think quilting is kind of like painting by numbers. It's an art, and sometimes things are just happy little accidents. From a distance, I'm never going to see that one. You may not even be able to see it on camera. It's off by like just a millimeter or two. It's just enough that if I had this quilt in my lap and I was studying it and trying to pick myself apart, I would notice it. But I don't think that it is worth the hassle of seam ripping. Now we have G to H, and we're to set that aside. And the next step is to do I to J. So here's J, and here's our I, and it's gonna go just like this. And these points do not match, so you don't have to worry about that. You just match your corners. We've completed step 7. We have sewn I to J. As you can tell, we have 2 seams left to sew. We're gonna sew the right side of the face to the left side of the face, and then we will attach the body. While we're attaching these 2 sides, the corner of the ear is going to match to the top of the head. However, as you can tell, even if it gets a little bit off, it doesn't look too bad. So you can fiddle with it a little bit. I wouldn't spend too much time worrying about it. And there you have it. That is the fox's face all completely assembled. We can throw his chest on there and he is done. While attaching I and J to the rest of the block, you're going to want to pay attention so that the orange matches to the orange, this white matches exactly to the white, and the corner of his chest, his white chest, is going to come right up next to the side of his head. And if you're a little bit off there, it doesn't look bad, but I do personally think that it looks better meeting exactly. And there we go. Freddy the Fox is done. If you're like me and you glue based, some of these seams may be a little bulky feeling, but I assure you, once you get a little water on them and rinse most of the glue out, they should soften up quite a lot and won't feel quite so hard. This completes week number 4 of our Stars of the Forest Quilt Along for a Cause 2020.